It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer on the 6th day of July, 2026. Hope you had an eventful, happy, satisfying holiday weekend over the 4th of July. Well, every July 1st, Iowa turns a page. It's the start of the state's fiscal year, and it's the day most laws passed during the legislative session actually take effect. So this year, that page turn came with about 100 new Iowa laws. Some will touch nearly every Iowan. How property taxes are calculated, for instance, or how fast you can drive on certain highways. Others are aimed narrowly, but forcefully at specific communities. Johnson County, for instance, just lost the ability to run its own local ID program. And several new laws rewrite the rules around some of the most contested issues in American life right now. Later in the hour, we'll talk about how now Iowans seeking a medication abortion must now see a doctor in person. Conversation with IPR's Natalie Krebs. She'll explain that. Also, Iowa has a tough new mandatory minimum for repeat felons. The Mahaska County Attorney Andrew Ritland joins us to tell us about that. And also there's been a rollback of bias training. Remember that bias training passed after George Floyd's murder? I'll be joined later by State Representative Ruth Ann Gaines with her thoughts on that rollback. First, though, let's get an overview, a flyover. Who better to do that than Erin Murphy, Des Moines Bureau Chief of the Gazette. He's tracked these bills from committee rooms to the governor's desk, and he joins us now in our Des Moines studio. Hi, Erin.
And I got the scars to prove it. Thanks for having me on, Ben, as always.
I do not doubt that. Let's start broad. We don't have time to go through 100 laws, so we'll pick out the most significant that took effect last week. What is the through line? What was this legislature most focused on? Is there a way to tell that?
I think if you had to pick one, I mean, obviously, over the course of 4 months and literally hundreds of bills, the breadth gets pretty wide. But if you wanted to pick one significant through line, I think it was immigration and citizenship. You saw that as a central factor in a lot of different bills in a lot of different arenas, in education, in local government laws, in state government hiring. So I think immigration enforcement and citizenship was one of the broader reaching topics that we saw this year.
Right, and E-Verify, remind us what that is and how that comes into this new scenario for us.
Yeah, that's a federal program that's been around for a while, and it allows employers to check it. It's essentially a database that allows them to check the citizenship status of individuals, and they can use that if they're trying to make hiring decisions and determining whether a worker lives in the country legally. And there's been, we saw it come to the front this year too, but that program has been debated at the State House for years and about whether, it should be mandated in some cases for certain kinds of employers to use it.
Mm-hmm. Minors can no longer consent on their own HPV vaccine. Parental consent is now required. Remind us of the reasoning lawmakers gave for that change.
Yeah, for the folks who supported the law, it was very simply that they believed that the parents should be aware of when their child, a minor, is getting any kind of vaccine. The pushback that people worried about the impact of this law is that maybe there's a case of a teen who would like to get the vaccine, which has been shown to be very effective at preventing certain kinds of cancers. That if they want to do that and maybe their parents are against it for whatever reason, then that could put that child's health at risk.
Also in the medical arena, the Medical Ethics Defense Act, that gives, I understand, healthcare providers some new latitude to decline participation in care in situations where that care would conflict with their beliefs.
Yeah, and this is sort of an expansion of a bill that they passed recently. Forgive me I can't remember the exact year, but they recently passed a bill that had already established this ability for healthcare professionals to deny participation in certain kinds of cares if it violated their religious objections. Mm-hmm. And this new bill this year, new law, expands that to moral and ethical reasons too. So it kind of broadens the scope of objections that a healthcare professional can raise to offering or participating in any particular healthcare service.
Mm-hmm. Moving along, I'll just mention the significant expansion of protections for child trafficking victims. Minors can no longer be arrested or prosecuted for prostitution. That's one I think that passed with less controversy than most. Erin, I believe, we were calling that one.
Yeah, that's correct. That's one of those we talk about, and you hear it a lot. People say, you hear about all the bills that are most contentious, but of a majority of them have bipartisan support, and this was one of those. It was a literal unanimous vote in both chambers that was passed over the course of 2 years, 45-0 in the Senate, 91-0 in the House.
Mm-hmm. Let me mention a few others, and we can linger on any ones you feel we should. Adult websites now have to verify users' ages. The speed limit went up on some 2-lane highways. Child care assistance program for child care workers, now permanent rather than a pilot. Any of those worth pausing on? Fairly straightforward?
Yeah, pretty straightforward. The speed limit one is obviously the one that sort of has gotten more attention because it applies to the vast, bigger swath of the population than the other ones. And forgive me, I'm already forgetting, but did you mention the animal torture one in there?
No, I didn't. Throw that in.
That was another one that was of multiple years coming. It's kind of one of those bills that seemed like a common sense thing to increase the penalties for animal torture, but it had stumbling blocks for various reasons, and they got that one done this year. And now there is a definition of animal torture under which it is a felony on first offense, which it had not been in the past in Iowa, and Iowa was the only state in which that was the case.
Mm-hmm. Homeowners getting a new property tax break, 10% exemption on taxable value with a floor and a ceiling. Put on your CPA hat, Erin. What can you tell us about people, what they should expect to see as changes on the tax bill according to this?
That's such a great question because obviously that was the topic of the session, and that bill was the bill that got the most work and attention and was literally put together finally and signed in the literal last hours of the session. But it's an open question as to what the impact will be and what it'll look like and how soon homeowners will see that relief on their property tax bills. There's some parts of it that they should see right away, including the exemption piece. But whether that brings down the overall cost of a homeowner's property taxes, that's sort of a verdict that's going to be out for at least until the next year's bills come, if not years and years down the road. It's a complicated piece, a lot of moving parts, and it's one that we're going to have to monitor over a long course of time.
Right. In just a few minutes after the break, a conversation with IPR's Natalie Krebs on the abortion medication law. Iowans now, according to Iowa law, must get prescriptions for mifepristone and similar drugs in person rather than by telemedicine. There are some important footnotes there because other states are there and have shield laws. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll hear from Natalie Krebs. But, Erin, let's dig into what maybe the biggest downstream cost to the state in terms of new laws, the habitual offender law. Walk us through exactly what changed.
Yeah, so this created a new mandatory minimum sentence for anyone convicted of 3 felonies. So it's and that's where you get the sort of 3 strikes moniker that supporters of this bill, mostly Republicans, applied to it. And what that has created, the potential for, is more people in the state's prisons, and they are already over capacity. That's state data that shows that. Literally every state-owned prison in the state is already over capacity. And this is projected to, and you can imagine, pretty easy to imagine why, will increase capacity. And so now you have costs associated with either expanding current prisons to account for that capacity or possibly having to build new prisons, which obviously comes at a great cost. And there's been some projections by the state's nonpartisan legislative services agency. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but I believe that number was $8 billion potentially up to a projection on what this new law could cost because of the increase in prison population and the need to Yeah.
And it's easy to understand because I think the Department of Corrections projects the law will increase our prison population in the state by nearly 50% over the next 3 years. That's a hefty increase.
Yep. And supporters say that that is an acceptable cost. It's needed because there is a small percentage of people who are repeat or habitual offenders is a term they use often that for whatever reason just can't or struggle to be rehabilitated and go out and commit repeat crimes over and over, and that this is a public safety measure, that this law is intended to keep those kinds of people away from Iowans.
Okay. Erin, we've only got a couple minutes. Our flyover, we've got to increase our speed on the flyover here. Well, I want to mention, though, that racial disparity is a question that the Legislative Service has also flagged in that habitual offender law that's going in. But perhaps we can close out on the governor's powers law, because the politics of this are interesting, Erin. The Governor Reynolds signed it herself, limiting a future governor's authority. She's not running again. What's the backstory on why this became a priority? We can sort of connect dots, right?
Absolutely. And there's a couple elements to this. One is I will say that the specific piece about a governor's authority in a pandemic and the ability to issue public health emergencies, certain orders to close businesses, churches, et cetera, that piece has been out there. Conservatives, Republicans have wanted that piece basically ever since COVID, and that part of it they wanted, regardless of whether Governor Reynolds was going to run for another term again. But some of the other elements, and there was at one point a piece of the bill that would have even broadened it and not allowed the next governor to, or would have codified private managed Medicaid and taken that decision out of the governor's hands. Democrats pointed to the very obvious timing of that with an election this fall, and the absolute certainty we'll have a different governor, and the distinct possibility that it'll be a governor of a different political party.
Erin Murphy, thanks for coming in. We're landing the plane now. Thanks for the flyover.
Thanks for having me on, Ben. Appreciate it. It was a great night.
Erin Murphy of the Gazette, back in just a moment. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. More than 100 new Iowa laws took effect July 1st, the start of the state's new fiscal year. Today, we're discussing some of the key ones. Well, if you're an Iowan seeking a medication abortion, you can no longer do it entirely by phone or video call. A new state law that took effect July 1st ends telehealth prescribing for the abortion pills mifepristone and misoprostol. Recently, I spoke with IPR's health reporter Natalie Krebs to fill us in. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Ben.
Let's start with the basics. What does this new law actually change for someone seeking a medication abortion in Iowa?
Yeah, for someone in Iowa, it means that you now have to go in person to a doctor to get abortion medication. Abortion medication is approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration to be prescribed through telehealth, so you can do a telehealth appointment and get it in the mail. But this Iowa law makes it so for in this state, if you're talking to an Iowa provider, you actually need to go see them in person in order to get abortion medication.
Okay, so Iowa already has a 24-hour waiting period and mandatory counseling on the books. Walk us through what the process looks like now, start to finish. How does this in-person prescribing requirement stack on top of what I just mentioned?
Right. It would be kind of another step that Iowans need to take. So you'd ultimately have to go in person for an appointment, for a counseling session, for an ultrasound, and then come back 24 hours later to that same in-person appointment to actually get prescribed abortion medication. So it just makes it another step for Iowans who are seeking abortion care.
Supporters of this law call it a safety measure. What's the case they're making?
Right. Supporters of this law have said it's really about safety, and that going in person to get abortion medication and being watched over by a doctor, they can monitor you for any side effects, any issues you might have with it. So essentially, supporters have said they're pushing this because they feel like it's safer for women who are seeking abortions in Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Is this just another step in what is a continuing road here to get these medication abortion drugs off the market entirely. This is an incremental step for the backers, or is this far enough in their view?
Right. Sort of as you mentioned, a lot of the supporters of this bill were abortion rights opponents. And essentially, a lot of abortion rights opponents, their ultimate goal is to get this drug off the market. Access to medication abortions has made abortion a lot easier in this era. And so, we saw recently the Supreme Court ruled ultimately to let abortion pills remain available via telehealth. So there's been a number of attacks on restricting, the access to abortion pill across the country. And this very much reflects another step in that.
Yeah. So what's the counter argument from abortion rights advocates here?
Right. Abortion rights advocates very much oppose this bill. And they said, it's not about safety, really. It's about, again, just creating more hurdles for women who are seeking abortions. I think they also argue that, that in-person requirement, we've seen a lot of abortion clinics close across Iowa and such, due to policies like Medicaid cuts and restrictions on abortion since Roe versus Wade was overturned 2 years ago. So they say, ultimately this has just made it harder for women seeking an abortion to get an abortion in Iowa when there are already limited options to begin with.
Natalie, is there any dispute over the medical evidence here on the two sides? Is telehealth prescribing of mifepristone considered less safe by mainstream medical bodies, or is that contested?
I would say, this is something that is debated a lot, but evidence has shown overall that abortion medication is safe. Very few women do have complications. Some have complications like bleeding, which actually is to be expected. It's kind of part of the process. But overall, there hasn't been a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that it's been more dangerous for women to get prescribed abortion medication through telehealth, especially if they have, follow-up doctor's appointments through telehealth where they can get checked on, they can check symptoms, check how they're doing, and see if maybe they need additional medical support.
Okay, let's have you talk about the Shield Law workaround. This is where it gets complicated a bit, Natalie. You report that Iowans can still get these pills via telehealth from a doctor in a state with a Shield Law, Illinois or Minnesota, for instance. Explain how that works and why it's legal.
Right. So this is super confusing. This is where this law is really confusing because you have an Iowa law and ultimately it only dictates Iowa providers. So it means, from an Iowa provider, someone who is in this state cannot prescribe you an abortion pill through telehealth. However, you can still get abortion medication through telehealth if you do so from a provider who works in states with Shield laws like Minnesota or Illinois. And so what a Shield law is this law that ultimately protects medical providers from legal risks from states like Iowa that have banned or restricted abortion to be able to prescribe pills via telehealth and send it to people out of state. So it is really confusing. So technically, yes, Iowans can still access abortion medication through telehealth. They just have to do it from an out-of-state provider now.
Is there any legal risk to an Iowa patient who uses a Shield Law provider? You just said that the prescribing doctor in another state would be protected, but what about the Iowa patient?
Well, right now, laws don't criminalize people seeking abortion. So ultimately, with this new law in Iowa and then Shield laws, ultimately the risk comes down to providers. So, for example, if someone were to get pills from a doctor via telehealth in Iowa now, it would be the doctor who would possibly get in trouble for breaking the law and prescribing medication in a way that's against Iowa law. So Shield laws, work the same. They ultimately just protect doctors from prescribing medication that would potentially clash with Iowa's law.
Okay. Put this in a broader landscape for us because it comes after a Supreme Court ruling in a Louisiana case. It also is happening against the backdrop of Iowa's 6-week cardiac activity ban that's been in effect since 2024. put this latest change, July 1st change, in a larger context.
Right. The larger context is this debate over abortion medication. I mean, abortion medication's really been this big game changer for abortion. It's really easy to access. It's approved by the FDA up to 10 weeks of pregnancy. And it's made it so abortions haven't really fallen across the country because people who have early term pregnancies can easily access abortion medication that can be mailed to them. They don't have to travel. So you're seeing from abortion rights opponents this attack on abortion medication, essentially, because it helps people access abortion care across the state. So you're seeing, the Supreme Court case we saw at the U.S. Supreme Court looked at removing that telehealth designation, so making it so people would have to go in person to get abortion medication. And you're seeing laws like this in Iowa from abortion rights opponents as well that are requiring that people go in person to access this medication. So the broader context of this is really, access to abortion medication and how it's changed how easily you can access abortion care in this country.
We just heard in our news that back here in Iowa, Planned Parenthood closing its Iowa City clinic. What did they say drove that decision?
Planned Parenthood has faced a lot of financial challenges recently. They have restrictions on Medicaid funding and they get a lot of Medicaid patients, as well as, Iowa's abortion law that, bans abortion at around 6 weeks of pregnancy has cut down the amount of services that they can offer. We saw them announce that they were closing their Iowa City clinic at the end of July. That's one of 2 clinics they have left in the state. Their remaining one is just in Des Moines. Last year we saw them close 4 clinics. At one point, Planned Parenthood had a number of clinics across the state, and now they're down to just 1 clinic in Des Moines. And as well as they do offer telehealth services as well.
What are Iowa's remaining options then for in-person abortion after this Planned Parenthood in Iowa City closes?
Right, that's a good question, Ben. So, abortion clinics in Iowa is down to 2. There's the Planned Parenthood clinic in Des Moines that offers abortion care, and then there's the Emma Goldman clinic in Iowa City that also offers abortion care. So, Iowans living in rural areas across the state will definitely have to travel if they're seeking abortion care in the state.
Thank you very much, Natalie Krebs, IPR health reporter.
Thank you, Ben.
A conversation with Natalie last week. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer, back live again as we do a quick survey of some of the most important new laws that we have here in Iowa. Over 100 of them went into effect on July 1st, the beginning of the new fiscal year. Iowa just rewrote the math on repeat offenders. Starting this month, a 3rd felony conviction carries a mandatory minimum of 7 years. That's more than double the old 3-year enhancement. And for the first time, that time cannot be shortened through good behavior credits or a suspended sentence. Supporters call it long overdue. Accountability for people the system has, in their view, cycled through revolving doors for years. Now, critics, though, point to the price tag. Iowa's own Department of Corrections projects the prison population could grow by nearly half within 3 years, and to a striking racial disparity in who's actually charged as a habitual offender. My next guest has spent his career on the front lines of that revolving door, so to speak, prosecuting the same names in many cases again and again in his own community. Andrew Ritland is the Mahaska County Attorney. He's also legislative chair of the Iowa County Attorney Association. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate it.
And we want to make sure, I think you want a disclaimer out here. You're speaking as the Mahaska County attorney, and these are your own views, not necessarily the association's.
That's right. I'm speaking in my capacity as Mahaska County Attorney on the views of this legislation.
All right. Walk us through what this new habitual offender law actually improves in your view. What was broken about the old 3-year enhancement?
The prior system effectively became a revolving door because there isn't a lot of truth in sentencing in Iowa. So even with a 3-year mandatory minimum, it wasn't that long ago when credits would reduce that minimum to a year and a half. And a person would discharge a 15-year sentence on average in 6 years. So a person who has a repeated history of committing felonies would be out in a year and a half and be discharged from a sentence on parole in a few years after that. What this bill does is ensure there's actually truth to what we're telling people as to what offenders will serve. Now, from a 3-year mandatory minimum, it becomes a 7. As you noted, there's no earned time credits against that minimum, meaning that's a true 7-year minimum sentence they'd have to serve. And the maximum sentence increased from 15 to 20 years, which in effect will have extended monitoring on parole for this population of individuals.
Mm-hmm. I understand that there's a case from your own community that puts a face on this for you. A man with 6 prior felonies convicted of strangling his girlfriend in 2019. Tell us a little bit about that so that we can be a little more concrete here about what we're talking about in terms of the victims here and the victims' families that have suffered.
Absolutely. So this is a case I dealt with again, most recently, earlier this year. We have an individual in our county we prosecuted. Over the years, he had picked up multiple felony offenses. In 2019, he was released from prison after being convicted of 6 prior felonies. So he's now on parole for 4 felonies. And those included burglary and crimes of violence as well. So burglary and drugs, and had prior violent offenses. So he's on parole for these felony convictions. Then he strangles his girlfriend while on parole. We send him back to prison, again, as an habitual offender for this now 7th felony offense. He serves right around a year and a half, 2 years, as I mentioned, and gets back on parole. None of his earned time credit was taken away, so even though he committed a new felony offense while on parole, there was no real additional time he had to serve on that underlying felony. He gets out of prison, and a year and a half later, commits another string of violent offenses against the same victim. Another strangulation. He beats her to the point of unconsciousness. And again, now we send this person back, now the 8th, 9th, and 10th times on felonies. Now the judge has sentenced this person just recently to a 15-year minimum sentence because we had 5 felonies all stacked one after the other with a 75-year minimum. So this is the example. When I talk to people about why holding repeat offenders is accountable, is because it helps prevent future victimization. Not everyone is going to commit other crimes, certainly, but there's a certain subset of the population who has proven by their repeated behavior that they are not going to change. And for those people, we need to hold them accountable in the prison system so there won't be another victim, so there won't be another strangulation, so there won't be another crime of violence. And I think that's what people have to understand when they're thinking about the cost of these bills and what they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. The cost question we'll have to deal with after the break. We've got about 2 minutes before that break, Andrew. Let's tackle this in those 2 minutes. Critics say, cases like the one you just mentioned are an exception, not the rule, and that this law will sweep up far more people than it needs to. How do you answer those critics?
I would say that a prosecutor still has discretion as to whether to charge this enhancement at all. As with any other enhancement in Iowa law, it's up to the prosecutor whether to seek that enhancement or not. So if there are legitimate cases where the application of this enhancement would lead to an unjust result, the prosecutor, in their discretion, can choose not to seek that enhancement. So there is relief valve in the system to ensure that a just outcome is ultimately achieved. And I think this bill gets us down the road of achieving that outcome.
Okay, we'll have to tackle the cost question on this new law in just a moment. With us is Andrew Ritland, legislative chair of the Iowa County Attorneys Association. He's the Mahaska County Attorney. And when we come back, we'll have his view on how the Department of Corrections has projected this new law could grow Iowa's prison population by nearly 50% in the next 3 years, requiring, of course, new prisons. Our prisons are already bursting at the seams. So I'll ask him when we come back how we weigh that cost against the goal that he just laid out for us. We'll be back in just a moment as we look at some of the most significant new laws that came into effect on July 1st. It's River to River from IPR News. Back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. With me live, Andrew Ritland, the Mahaska County Attorney, and we're talking about a new law in effect now for a few days, saying that a third felony conviction carries a mandatory minimum of 7 years. That's more than double the old 3-year enhancement. And for the first time, that cannot be shortened through good behavior credits or suspended sentence. Supporters call it long overdue. Critics point to the price tag. Let's get to that, Andrew, here. The Department of Corrections projecting this could grow Iowa's prison population by nearly 50% and require new prisons. How do you weigh that cost against the goal here?
So I think we have to remember that there is no costless option. When a repeat offender gets out of prison and he damages a victim's property, when he physically injures that victim, when that victim needs mental health counseling, there is a cost, right? That cost is borne by the victim. So the question is, do we prioritize or shift the cost to individual victims when these repeat offenders come out and commit crimes? Or should society as a whole bear this cost because we're protecting society as a whole? So I think that's the lens we need to look at this problem. Who is going to bear the cost? And it's my view that for these repeat offenders who are clearly going to repeat in their criminal behavior just based on their past, that should be a problem that society itself needs to fix. And we shouldn't be okay with the fact that the victims individually are going to bear this cost. Now, as to what the right level of funding is and what the right amount of taxpayer dollars should go to this fund, obviously I'm not an expert in that arena, but I think we have to appreciate the effect of not doing anything has on society as well.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, the Nonpartisan Legislative Service Agency found Black Iowans are sentenced as habitual offenders at more than 5 times their share of the population. Does that number give you pause in conjunction with this new law?
Well, I think everyone would agree that laws need to be uniformly applied and race neutral and neutral for those kind of protected classes. Now, I cannot say why that disparity exists, but I would say that this habitual sentence enhancement applies regardless of the crime, right? So if an individual is committing these crimes, if they are going back and back and back through the court system, they have demonstrated by their behavior that they need to be incarcerated, regardless of the race of that person. I can tell you from my experience, I have not seen race ever become a factor in how a court sentences, how a person is charged, or how a crime is investigated. I'm not saying it's impossible. All I am saying is that this is a race-neutral law to ensure habitual offenders of any race are not re-victimizing Iowans in the future.
Mm-hmm. This undoubtedly will increase incarceration, the projection by 50% in 3 years in Iowa. Opponents say incarceration, Andrew, doesn't actually reduce recidivism, that Iowa's existing programming, drug courts, halfway houses, already give people a path to change. What's your response to that? Are we putting too much into locking people up rather than let's get them back rehabilitated in society?
I've been doing this work for over 15 years now. And what I've learned is you can incentivize people to make right choices, but you cannot change them. If a person does not want to change their behavior, if they don't want to take advantage of drug court, mental health court, diversion programs, other kind of programming we have throughout the criminal justice system, we will not be able to change who they are. But there needs to be an option on the table for those people who say, I am not going to change. I'm going to continue down this lifestyle. There needs to be an option to say, fine, then we have to isolate you from society to protect the community from you, right? I would say there are the vast majority of cases I have run into. Judges give repeated chances to offenders. They give them multiple opportunities through the halfway house, drug court, all these programming. And it's only when a person has reached the end of that programming does a court typically then impose a sentence. It is not the case, in my experience, that judges will impose, on the first, second felony offense, let's say, impose sentences, right? People have to earn their way to prison, and they absolutely have. And this bill just makes sure we have a tool in our toolbox to address those people who refuse to change.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, we have just a minute or so left here. I wanted to have you comment on a couple of bills that I think are worth flagging here. One reclassifies sexual exploitation of a minor from a suspendable to a non-suspendable offense with up to a 5-year sentence. The other changes how intimidation with a dangerous weapon is charged based on intent. What do you have to say about those two quickly?
Yes, very quickly. I think sexual exploitation of minor change is going to be very impactful. Now, any violation of that section, including possession of child sexual abuse material or otherwise known as child pornography, now must go to prison. I think that's a very good change and protects the kids of Iowa. As far as intimidation with a dangerous weapon, I think that's gone under the radar, but that's also a pretty substantial change, particularly in those cases where there are homicide charges or attempted murder charges. With this change, it gives a middle ground for a jury if they find that there wasn't an intent to kill, but an intent to cause serious harm, an option between a Class B felony and an aggravated misdemeanor. So I think those are going to actually have quite a bit of a practical impact, though there hasn't been a lot of focus on those bills. And I would say from the County Attorney Association side, those have been a priority of the association as a whole for the intimidation and the sexual exploitation. So as an association, we're glad to see those pass.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, we covered a lot of territory. I hope we didn't leave anything out important. If so, you have a few seconds.
Yes, I would just want to say that in every local community, there are people working to hold offenders accountable through the criminal justice system and your local prosecutor. So you have to, if you have any concerns on how these bills are playing out locally, talk to your local county attorney to understand the problems in your local area.
Mahaska County Attorney Andrew Ritland. Thank you for joining us live, Andrew. Take care.
Thanks again, Ben.
It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. In June of 2020, man, that seems like a long time ago. In the days after George Floyd's murder, the Iowa legislature did something that I think surprised almost everyone in the building. It passed a police reform bill unanimously, banning chokeholds and requiring officers to intervene when they witness misconduct. For the lawmakers who pushed for it for years, it felt like a turning point, a promise from the state that things would be different. Now, 6 years later, part of that promise has been rolled back with the new laws that we're reviewing on the program today. A new law eliminates the requirement that Iowa's Law Enforcement Academy provide annual training on implicit bias and racial and cultural awareness, though de-escalation training remains in place. My next guest was in the room in 2020. She's one of the founding members of the Iowa Legislature's Black Caucus and remembers exactly what that unanimous vote felt like, I think. Representative Ruth Ann Gaines of Des Moines. She represents Des Moines in the Iowa House. Representative Gaines, welcome to our program.
Oh, Thank you so much for having me back and giving me the opportunity to speak about such an important piece of legislation.
Okay, take us back to 2020, Representative, if you could. The legislature was already in a strange, disrupted session. We had COVID. We should mention that as the context. Then George Floyd was killed. How did this bill actually come together?
Well, the few members of the Black Caucus, Ross Smith from Waterloo and Akil Abdul-Samad from Des Moines, wrote the legislation and met with the governor and several other key people for the days that we were there. As you said, we had been dismissed in March because of COVID, and we were brought back for 10 days to work on legislation. And that piece of legislation was something that the Black Caucus really, really found necessary. First of all, as you said, on May 25th, the whole nation watched the murder of George Floyd, so that was very much on everyone's mind. And we knew that unless we did pass something, this could happen anywhere. So it was very, very important, and we were all very, very tense.
Right. It passed unanimously. Republicans stood with you in surprising numbers. I think you've called it the best day of your career. Why did it feel like such a promise was being made at that moment?
I do think that it was the best day of my career because one of my intentions of being a legislator was to work on making Iowa a more open-minded state to diversity. So to see something like this pass through both the House and the Senate as quickly as it did was just overwhelming. And if you recall, as the bill was being voted on, the four of us who were there as Black members raised our fists to show how much we felt that this was a strong bill for Iowa. And I recall specifically, as I turned to walk back to my seat, Governor Reynolds ran over to me, grabbed my arm, and said, "Ruth Ann, this is wonderful, but I hope you don't think this is the end. This is only the beginning. We're going to do a lot more." So as she let go of my arm and I continued to walk, I was overwhelmed with happiness. I thought that we're going to see a big change in Iowa, and I'm going to be here to be a part of it, to actually witness and vote. I was really excited that night. It was an evening vote, like after 6 o'clock or something like that, and I would have jumped for joy if I hadn't looked so silly. She promised that. She promised it.
Okay. Representative Gaines, we have 5 minutes left. I wanted to cover the reversal here. A piece of that bill is now gone, the implicit bias and cultural awareness training requirement. And I want to read a statement from some who couldn't be with us today before we have your view. We invited Brad Carney, director of the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, to join us today. While he couldn't make it, he did send a statement. In that statement, he says the academy used to include bias training in its basic curriculum, but stopped doing so after this House file took effect last year. According to the Iowa Attorney General's office, the law actually prohibits bias training, so the Academy hasn't taught implicit bias in its basic or required in-service training since 2025. And that's a different law last year. But Carney notes they still do teach community policing and partnerships. He also points out that individual police chiefs and sheriffs have the authority to go beyond the state's minimum standards, so local departments can choose to provide additional training on their own. And I'll mention we also reached out to the Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association to join the conversation. They said their members were unavailable today. So what are your thoughts about this piece being rolled back?
Well, it seems that we are in line with what's happening nationally. And it saddens me because we do need that training. I remember the Police Academy offering that way back in the 90s and continuing on. And it did help a lot of people, police officers and everyone else involved with the training, to realize that we all have it. There's not one individual who doesn't have some kind of bias, but often we don't know it, as I feel the people who wrote this legislation to turn it around don't get it. We have to be in a place where we can honestly say that I didn't know that I felt this way. And if you don't have the proper training to help you identify that, it goes unnoticed, and sometimes police officers, they're human beings, that bias comes out unknowingly to them, and they do things that they should not do, often taking the lives of people that didn't have to die.
Yeah, and I know you believe Iowa is such a great state, and truly it is, and you've served us in your capacity as an elected official so long that you believe Iowa is a great state. But at the same time, you've said Iowa can do better than this. I wonder, Representative, what would better look like from here?
I think it boils down to the people that we elect. I think on both sides, I think that if voters really look at the past lives and statements that people who are candidates make, we would be able to make a better decision on who we judged and who we voted for, hoping that these people will do the right thing and will mandate implicit bias. Mm-hmm. I think we've come so far as a state, at least in the years that I have lived here, and we can do better. We're following national politics, which is not always a good idea. We need people who care about people.
Yeah,
it seems like. Go ahead.
We have 30 seconds left. More broadly, and you brought it to a national perspective, but it used to be that you could cross the aisle and talk with your fellow lawmakers. Has that changed in the last few years? What's different now?
It's changed drastically. I was there since 2011. Since 2024, we seem to have some legislators who don't want to talk. And they're not necessarily the younger ones, but they feel that we have all done as much as we could do to help minorities, to help immigrants, and to those who have not had an opportunity. We feel we've done it, and now everything is equal, and we don't need these laws anymore. We need legislators who know we have a long road to travel, and we need to be open-minded and open up some of this legislation to help all of Iowans, not just a few. Power seems to be the word that not everyone, but a lot of legislators are thinking about. Not people, but power. Okay. And that's sad.
Representative Ruth Ann Gaines, always a delight to have you on our program. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I hope it strikes a chord in many of our listeners, and they'll do the right thing.
Today's show produced by Danny Gear, technical support from Nev Kelly and Tony Sarabia. I'm Ben Kiefer.